Everyone, welcome to the second video of week 3 for English 1020. In this video, we will talk about three things. We will talk about the concept of genre. We will then talk about project 2, so that you are prepared to begin working on that as soon as we hit week 4. And then we are going to talk about a component of project 2, which is creating a research question, okay? Okay, so I want to talk very briefly about genre. This might be a term that you are familiar with, that you might have used in terms of film, in film, music, books, etc. We're familiar with the word, but maybe it doesn't quite make sense in terms of school or academia. So I want to just super briefly touch on this. Genre is a type of text used frequently in a social situation to allow various people in that situation to interact together. So this definition, it's not my favorite because it seems to make the term more complex than perhaps it really is. But I think that once we break it down, it does work for what genre is. So if you'd like to watch this video that it's pretty short, about what genre is, this might be a good video if you're not sure. Okay, but according to this definition, genre is a type of something that is used in a social situation to allow various people in that situation to interact together. Okay, so let's put this in terms of our class. Maybe when you came to this class, you did not know what a rhetorical analysis was. You were like, never heard of it, no idea, what does that mean? Explain. A rhetorical analysis is a genre of writing, though, right? We've all learned that now. We know the components of a rhetorical analysis, okay? So perhaps one of your friends comes to you and they say, oh man, I have to write this rhetorical analysis for my English class. Well, you already know what that is. You are familiar with that genre. You can say, oh, okay, I get it. You have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to analyze the author's, ethos, pathos, logos, and you need to find the rhetorical situation, etc. Okay, so in that way, that is allowing you and your friend to interact in that situation. You already understand the genre. You understand what is expected. If you enter into another class and they say, you have to write a rhetorical analysis, that shouldn't happen outside of the English class, but maybe they will ask you to do that. You already know what that means. That gives you the code of that genre, right? So I've included this picture here because looking at it, we can already make some assumptions about what type of genre this picture might be associated with, right? Certainly, I think whatever is about to happen is not going to be good. We might have some supernatural elements. We might have just like a murder mystery. We've got this lake, which probably does not bode well for this person on the horse. There's a lot of things that this simple image is conveying to us about the genre, okay? So in this way, it's allowing the artist of this picture to communicate with us, the viewers. We already are understanding and picking up on elements of the genre through this picture, okay? Hope that makes sense. So let's turn again to looking at this in college writing. So I've included some types of college writing here. I want to touch on just a few. So we have expository writing. So this just explains something. For example, a news article, a report, things that are just informative. And then we have a narrative, which tells a story, right? So if you go and read, I don't know, The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, which is what that picture reminds me of, you are reading a narrative or a story. And then we have persuasive writing or research. This is probably what you are most familiar with from your high school English classes. But these top 3, the rest are certainly important in types of writing, but these top 3 are really what I want to touch on. So in project 1, we looked at a piece of expository writing, or maybe also persuasive writing, right? That might depend on the piece that you selected, but something is being explained, right? It's telling us about something that happened, or something that the authors think is going to happen, etc. So now in your project 1, you are then writing kind of a form of persuasive writing, and that you were analyzing it and saying, here's what I think that this author is doing, right? You're analyzing the piece, okay? In project 2, we are going to turn to this really weird style of writing that involves both narrative and research, okay? Don't freak out yet. So here is project 2. It is called the iSearch. It is my favorite paper of 1020, and I hope that my enthusiasm for it will translate to you all and hopefully inspire you and make you interested in it as well. Maybe not, but I can hope. The purpose of this project is to help you develop your own unique research skills. So this project is about you and the research, okay? So again, it's narrative and research together, okay? So in project 1, we were looking at a popular source, right? All of the articles that I selected were magazines, newspapers, etc., that were accessible to the general public. Anyone can read them. They're not meant to be scholarly works, okay? In project 2, we're not only transitioning from the type of writing we're doing, but we're transitioning to a different type of sources as well. So we will be looking at scholarly sources, which are written by scholars or researchers, professionals in the field. So if you are reading an article in biology, it is written by a biologist, someone with a PhD or an MD, someone who is an expert in that field. It is written primarily for other people in the field. It's not written for the general public. It's not something that is meant to maybe even be understood by people who are not in that field. If I were to go read a biology article, I would probably have no idea what's going on, right? Because it is for other experts in the field. Okay, so this is a transition that we're making from popular to scholarly right now, okay? So I want you to actually look at the assignment breakdown according to the assignment sheet. This is all available for you on Canvas now with the rubric and some sample papers. So please look at that. I've chosen just the main points of the assignment sheet to put on this PowerPoint and discuss with you. So make sure you actually pull the full thing up, okay? I want to just introduce the paper, like what it is, with this introduction and rationale. So as I said a few moments ago, this project is meant to help you explore and develop your own research skills, okay? So what you will start, or how you will start this paper, is you will pick a topic that you are interested in, and then you will compose a research question or questions about that topic. Through the paper, you will then work through the process of answering that question or finding sources about that question. So as you can see here, it is a reflective research narrative. And these are maybe genres that we don't expect to go together, right? We're reflecting and researching and we're writing a narrative, like, oh my God, it's so many things. But that is what this paper is. So you kind of have to disconnect from what you know about writing a research paper and think in this new genre. So I always tell my students to think about this paper as like a pre-research paper. So maybe you've written a research paper in high school, maybe you haven't, both are fine. But in a research paper, you have your introduction, you have your thesis, your main claim, and then you go through the paper and argue for that thesis. You try to claim, or you provide claims to support it, you provide evidence, you analyze things. This paper is like taking a step back. So instead of just starting at our thesis, saying, here's what I'm arguing, we are going to say, well, research doesn't really start with a claim, right? We don't just wake up one morning and say, aha, I have this beautiful idea and I'm going to go prove it. Instead, research starts with you thinking about something that you're interested in and working through the process of answering maybe questions you have about it, right? For example, how does the wall color in a house affect the mood of the individual? That might be something that you're thinking about when you're like, well, what colors do I want to paint my wall? Okay, well, how would that affect my mood, right? If that is something you're interested in, you don't just wake up one morning and say, well, blue obviously means this, right? Instead, there is a process behind that. So that's kind of what this paper is. It's like beginning the research process and writing a paper about the messy chaos that is research, okay? So for this project, you will pick a topic and compose a research question, and then you will compose a 1,250 word project that explains your research process and also your findings and reflections. So if you look at the syllabus, I believe I have 1,500 words as the minimum for this paper. I decided to reduce it just a little bit because of how little time you have to work on this project. So I hope that helps a little bit, but go based off the 1,250 minimum, okay? All right, so how do you begin this paper? So the first thing you need to do is to consider what issue or topic you would like to explore. And then as you're thinking about this, you want to think about, like, what do you already know about this? What might you want to learn more about this? So you just need to spend some time thinking about your topic and developing that into a question, okay? So what does this project look like? So in your introduction, you will have three things. You will have your research question, and that in this paper kind of acts as your thesis. So you don't have to answer this question in this paper. It'd be cool if you found an answer, but that's not the purpose. So your research question is really your thesis, what's driving your paper, okay? In your introduction, you also want to explain what you know or think you know. Give me some background on this topic. Why are you interested in it? Did your great-great-grandmother introduce you to black and white movies, and now you must answer this question about black and white movies? Maybe. And then you also want to include your motivation for finding the answer. So, like, what do you hope to gain from this research on this question? Okay? So then the body of the paper is really going to explain your research process. So as you begin this process, let me back up. Where do I want to start here? Okay, after you have a research question or a topic that you're interested in, you will then take this topic to the library databases. So hopefully you have watched, or you have looked at, or you will by the end of this third week, the module directly below the week 3 module that is all about the library, all about Wayne State's databases. Everything you need to know about our library is there. So once you watch the videos, read through that, you should have a better understanding of how to use our library and how you're going to go out finding sources to answer your question. Okay. Normally in a face-to-face class, I take us to the library and we actually like do all this together, and it's a little more fun. But in this case, you will simply have to look through the module yourself and watch the videos and do the like kind of exercises there. Okay. You will then begin to approach the research process. So once you have your question, you're going to want to use the tools and tips in the on the library module that you've read by this time, and you will want to try to find answers to that question, okay? So as you are working on this project, you want to kind of maybe record your experiences, what keywords you used, did it take you a really long time to find your sources, how your sources are related, etc. Okay? So you will want to make sure that you know all this information so that you can include it in your narrative. So an example that I always tell students always laugh at me, but I say that you can detail the process of finding your sources. So it might look something like, well, today when I found my sources, I woke up, I was really dreading it. I made a huge cup of coffee to wake me up and get me ready to do this. I then was browsing the Wayne State databases. I searched these keywords. I couldn't find any good sources. I then changed my keywords to be X, Y, and Z. And then I found 1,000 sources or whatever, okay? So you can actually include all of that information in your paper because it's meant to be a narrative. It's meant to tell me, how did you get to these sources? What was your process like? And that way I can help you as you try to figure out how to navigate doing research. If you're doing something and I'm like, oh, wow, that's so much harder than it needs to be. Here, let me show you this. I will be made aware of that based off of your narration. Okay? In the second part of the body of the paper, it talks a little bit more about what you should actually be finding or producing. So you're going to need 3 relevant secondary sources about your topic or question. So as you can see, you'll want to explain how you found that source. Again, as I just said, what search tools did you use? What keywords did you use? Was it difficult? Was it easy? How did you navigate through them? But then you will also want to transition from that narrative to doing more of a research, through more of a research lens, because you will want to summarize the information in the articles. So you want to tell me how you found the article, but you'll also want to say, oh, wow, here, look at this awesome quote that helps answer my question. And that's really cool. And then this article helped me rethink about my question or reframe my question in these ways, right? And that will be part of reflecting on how the source helps you answer your question. So you want to make sure that you have all these components. You want to have both narrative and research. So tell me about finding the sources. Tell me how the sources are related. Did one source lead you to another source? But also include how that source helps you answer your question, okay? And then in the conclusion of the paper, you'll kind of continue this weird duality thing where you want to tell me what you learned about your question, but you'll also want to tell me what you learned about research. So how did this paper help you figure out how to navigate the university's databases? How did you, or what did you learn about scholarly writing or peer review, etc.? Okay, and then finally, you want to try to make a claim about your question. So if in the introduction, your question is kind of your thesis, well, in your conclusion, hopefully you can attempt to answer it, even if it's not satisfactory. Maybe your conclusion is, well, my question was not good and I need to rework my question. Maybe that's what you learned. And that's a fine claim as well. But you want to try to claim something about your question at the end, okay? So here are your minimum requirements. Again, 1250 words minimum. You need at least 3 relevant secondary sources. So this means that you are not going on to Google, you are not finding Wikipedia entries, you are watching the library or going through the library module, and you are using the tools that they discuss there for finding sources. So you will be using pretty much only the Wayne State Library databases, to find these sources. We will talk about this more next week. I don't want to harp on sources too much right now, but you'll need 3 of those, okay? It should be in MLA format, and it will be due Sunday the 19th. So again, this project has the least amount of time afforded to it, simply because it's not as arduous as the other projects because it is a partial narration. So it shouldn't be as difficult for you to write, 500 words about the process of finding sources as it is if you were to be having to claim a thesis and then support that thesis with claims, right? Or with evidence, I'm sorry. It's not as arduous or time consuming. So that's why there's less time for this project. Whew. All right, so there's your project. Let's tackle the last part of this PowerPoint, which is just talking about what is research and how can you come up with a research question. Okay, so according to our textbook, inquiry-based research is posing a question and working to develop conclusions or solutions. So how are you going to begin researching or begin this project? You should begin by identifying a broader subject of interest that lends itself to investigation. So the example of our textbook is diabetes. Okay, so if that's your topic, you want to think of a question about that topic, you should begin to narrow it by asking open-ended how and why questions. Your question does not have to start with how or why, but I will say that usually the best questions do. For example, asking something like, I don't know, what is the currency of Portugal? That is going to be a very simple answer that you can simply Google and find the answer to that question. That's not a research question, right? How and why questions tend to make better research questions for that reason, because they're open-ended and they allow for complexity in the answers, okay? So this is a really great video that I recommend everybody watch for how to develop a research question. If you watch one video from this video, watch this. It should help you. But here are some examples. How does video game music affect the game? How does color affect mood? Why is laughing contagious? And how did Beyonce become the greatest singer of all time? So I've included these questions because I think that they show that your question does not have to be academic. It certainly can be. Say you were interested in biology and you really want to look at antibodies or something that is really relevant with the pandemic right now. Completely fine. But there's no reason that your question has to be academic. It can also be something that you are just interested in. The example that I usually do, I usually write like a little introduction with my students is how does having blue hair or colored hair affect getting a job in academia? So as you can see, that question starts with a how, and it allows for a lot of different answers and interpretations, right? That would be something that isn't really academic. It's going to be more about, you know, getting a job, about, I don't know, body modifications, and that's perfectly fine. So your question should be something that you are interested in, because in project 3, you're going to take your question and attempt to answer it, okay? So in that project, you actually are going to have a thesis that is arguing for an answer of the question. So you want to make sure that your question is something you are interested in, okay? So spend a few minutes just thinking about what are the things that really inspire me or that I am really interested in. I'm really interested in music. Okay, well, what can I do to come up with a question about music for this project? Okay. So how do you start? We've already talked about this a little bit, but the most important part of this project is having a solid question or multiple questions on which you can develop a whole paper, right? So choosing something you are passionate about is the easiest way to write this project, and is also why there's less time to write it, because it should be pretty easy to write about something you are interested in, okay? You also want to make sure your topic is not too broad or too narrow. You don't want things that can be answered simply. Starting with how or why will help alleviate some of that, but you want to make sure that your question is something that is searchable, right? So hopefully, as you all submit your weekly journal, I'll see what questions you're leaning towards, and I can give you some suggestions or critiques of your questions to help make them better and stronger, okay? So you just want to keep that in mind, right? Make sure that your question is something that could be answered, but it's not going to be too all-encompassing, right? So not too broad, not too narrow. All right. So I feel like I just talked a ton. I've given you a ton of information. I hope you're not overwhelmed, as I know you are all still working on completing your rhetorical analysis papers, but I wanted you to be aware of what the next project is so that you can be thinking about that. I look forward to getting your papers this week and helping you begin project 2. It's my favorite. I look forward to seeing all of your questions on Sunday. It's really fun to see what people decide to research, and I get to learn about 23 cool new topics, so that's always fun. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your week. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye, everyone.